Okay, we're recording, and this is the third mimer in the series. It's Parshas two Parshas. It's Parshas Nasso and Parshas Beha'alosecha together, and it continues the theme, which we'll speak about shortly. So I don't need to really give a recap of what the theme is, but it has to do with the pshitus or otherwise of the sfirot. In other words, the simplicity of the or. Is the or a simple or without any subdivision in the or is a subdivision in the or is a subdivision in the or caused by the keilim? This is the whole subject that we're discussing now, and he's going to go into it in this chapter and subsequent chapters as well. It's quite an important subject, obviously. So the Bible starts with Naso's Rosh B'nai Gershon Gam Hem L'Mishpachoisam. Again, this is Parshas Nasoi. It's talking about the idea of the census of B'nai Yisrael, which begins in Parshas Bamidbar. It continues in Parshas Nasoi, the census of the B'nai Levi. So the first census of the B'nai Levi is with Kohos, where the census with B'nai Levi is not actually only a census, it also has to do with an appointment, appointing them to the tasks, the various tasks in the Beis Hamikdash. So since Kohos, although Kohos was not the firstborn, he was the middleborn, nevertheless he had the most important function, which was the function of carrying the Aron on his shoulders. Ha'aron Mekatif Yisou, they'll carry the B'nai Kohos had to carry the Aron. So they were counted first. Then it says, Nasos Rosh B'nai Gershon Gam Heim L'Mishpachoisam. Count Gershon, the heads of the, in other words, the males. Count each person, each head. Gam Heim L'Mishpachoisam, according to the Mishpacha. In other words, Mishpacha Geshuni, right? All the families comprising the subsection of Levi called Gershon. So the Rebbe has a question here. Am I sharing my screen? Yeah, I am sharing my screen. Okay, so let me just highlight it so you know where we are. We have to understand, Mahu Oimroi, why does it say in the Pasuk, Gam Heim, them as well? Why does it say them as well? Now, we understand that they were second in the counting, but it's obvious everyone is being counted because everyone is being appointed to the various tasks, especially amongst the Leviim. They have the particular tasks. So why does it say Gam Heim? And in particularly in light of the fact that Gershon was in fact the firstborn of Levi. Gershon, Kohos, Amram. Right? So Kohos was the middle one, and even though he was counted first, but why Gershon? Why does it say Gam Heim by the Mishpacha of Gershon? What place is there to make any distinction between the descendants of Gershon, the sons of Gershon, from the sons of Kohos? That the pasuk should say Gam Heim, them as well. Gam b'derech klal. We also have to understand, in a more general sense, Mahu inyan Nasias Rosh. What's this whole concept of Nasias Rosh? Because the meaning that we take it to mean means count them. But the literal translation, Nasias Rosh, is to lift up their heads. And in fact, that's a very important concept. This whole concept of lifting up someone's head. Lifting up someone's head when you appoint a person to a holy task. That is lifting up their head. It causes them to raise their head. They feel a certain sense of responsibility and a sense of duty and so on and so forth. But we'll see about this later, how he answers this question of Nasias Rosh. So, in order to understand this, we first have to explain what we explained before. The world of Atzilus, there's two concepts. Then on the one hand, the world of Atzilus is called Gilui HaHelem, the revelation of that which was previously hidden. In other words, it was there, and it was there in all of its glory, so to speak, except it wasn't visible. It was concealed. It was concealed within the light, because the light was too powerful for it to be revealed. Once the light with tzimtzum, etc., has been nistalik or concealed, however you want to explain it right now, then the world of Atzilus comes into Gilui. So it's Gilui HaHelem, which was previously Behelem, is now Gilui. Vagam, but there's another aspect in the world of Atzilus, is that also Ba'en Aroch. It's also incomparable to what there was before. So how can it be both things? Gilui HaHelem means that it's comparable to what there was before, only it was hidden and now it's revealed. And yet we're saying at the same time as Ba'en Aroch, it's incomparable to what was there before. How do these two things figure together? So our explanation in the previous Mama'ar was, when it's Boyer, we explained, this is the concept of the oirois v'keilim da Atzilus, the lights and the vessels of the world of Atzilus. The keilim hein ba'en aroch. It's the keilim that are ba'en aroch, that are incomparable to what was before, because before there weren't any keilim per se, and now there are keilim. Whereas ha'oirois, the shoshim ha'kav, since the shorish of the or is in the kav, which means that the or is not ba'en aroch to the kav. So therefore, as far as the oiros are concerned, it's not ba'en aroch ela gilui hahelem. Va'kav hari hamshoch me'or ein sof shifnei hatzimtzum. The kav is drawn from the or ein sof lifnei hatzimtzum, as we explained. The kav is drawn from the or that was removed from the halal and becomes the igul hagodol. The igul hagodol is the oil that surrounds the halal. At the perimeter of the halal, there's the ore that was previously in the halal, and it's sort of piled up over there, kaviyochel, so to speak. So that the kav is drawn from that or ein sof shel-lifnei hatzimtzum, and therefore, since it's drawn from the or lifnei hatzimtzum, it's not ba'en aroch to the or before the tzimtzum. Adarabah, it is from the or before the tzimtzum, and therefore haraz b'chinas gilui hahelem. It's not ba'en aroch; it's gilui hahelem. Just simply a revelation of what was there previously, now comes into revelation in somewhat of a narrower sense, as we will explain further. Okay, that's the introduction to the Mama'ar. But we still have to understand this. We just said that there's two inyonim, there's oris and keilim. But we have a problem with this. What's the problem? The problem he's going to outline shortly is that we say as follows. The first manifested sphera is the sphere of Chokhmah. Of course, we have Keser, but Keser is an or makif. It's a makif sphera, and it's not counted amongst the 10 sphirot generally. In other words, we do count Keser, but when we count Keser, we only count Chitzonis HaKeser, not Pnimius HaKeser, as will become clear shortly. But in any event, Chokhmah is Reishis Hagilui, Reishis Chokhmah, as the pasuk goes. Reishis Chokhmah Yiras Hashem, right? Reishis Chokhmah. Chokhmah is the beginning. Chokhmah is the beginning of manifest existence, the beginning of Or Pnimi. Masha Ein Ken Keser is Or Makif. Okay. So it says another pasuk that says about Chokhmah Ma'ayin Timotzei. What does that mean to us? That means that Chokhmah is Bebechinas Yesh, and what's previous to that is Bechinas Ayin. So why is that a problem? Because, as he explains, Mashma, the Kayal Klaus Chokhmah. It refers to the entire Chokhmah. In other words, both the Oiras and the keilim of Chokhmah. The Oir of Chokhmah is also Yesh Mi Ayin from that point of view. We have a problem. It doesn't make a distinction in the pasuk when it says Chokhmah Ma'ayin Timotzei. It doesn't say Kliya Chokhmah Ma'ayin Timotzei. It says Chokhmah B'chlal Ma'ayin Timotzei. Mashma the Kal Klaus Chokhmah. Gam B'chinas Ha'or the Chokhmah. Shu B'chinas Ein Aroch L'Gabe Or Ein Sof. If we accept this, that it's Chokhmah Me'ayin Timotzei, then we have to say that Chokhmah is Ba'en Aroch to, it is incomparable to the Or Ein Sof Shunei HaTzimtzum. So it's not just the keilim that are Ba'en Aroch, it's even the Or. And not only just Stam the Or, but even the Or of Chokhmah, the highest of the manifest Sfirot. Ke'erech yesh l'gaba ayin, just like yesh to ayin, yesh is to ayin, because it says, Chokhmah Me'ayin Timotzei. But according to what we said earlier in Perek Ches, that the kav is drawn from the Or Ein Sof before the tzimtzum, and therefore the kav is not ba'en aroch. The kav is gilu ahelem. Haruchinas bli gevul. The kav is therefore the aspect of bli gevul, since it's attached to, or drawn from rather, the Or Ein Sof before the tzimtzum. Lochein ha'oiros heim gam ken bli ma. And therefore the order of the kav is also b'chinas bli ma, b'chinas pshitus. In other words, indivisible. It doesn't have the inyan of keilim. It doesn't have the inyan of subdivisions. The order of the kav does not have the inyan of subdivisions, apparently. Yeah, we are saying that the ayin is the or lifnei hatzimtzum. Yes, yes. Or rather, let's put it the other way. The or lifnei hatzimtzum is b'chinas ayin. Yeah, in other words, b'chinas bli ma, b'chinas pshitus. Yeah? Okay. And if that's the case, if the oiros come from the kav, how can you call the oiros by an aroch? So we have this, like we have this bilbul over here. On the one hand, we're saying that including the oir of chokhmah, not just the kli. And on the other hand, we say it's yeah by an aroch. Yeah, we're saying it's Ba'in Aroch. On the other hand, we're saying it's Gilu HaHelem. How could it be both things? There seems to be a Tarta de Satra over here, a contradictory situation. Okay, so we have to explain. Yeah, we're talking about Chokhmah Atzilus, but his explanation of Atzilus. Don't forget, yes, we're talking about Atzilus, but we said that Atzilus, there's two aspects of Atzilus: the oiros of Atzilus and the keilim of Atzilus. The oiros are Gilu HaHelem, and the keilim are Ba'in Aroch. But it turns out that the oiros also Ba'in Aroch, apparently, because it says about Chokhmah Ma'ayin Tematzah, right? So it must be Ba'in Aroch. What's before is Ayin, and this is Lagabe that. This is B'chinas Yesh. Okay. We could perhaps say, maybe the oiros of the esesphiros, which are drawn from the kav, when they are drawn from the kav, as they are drawn from the kav, they are pshutim legamre, completely pashut, in other words, without any subdivision. It's just all pure aura, so to speak, without any subdivisions. More pshitus the Or Ein Sof mamash, just like the pshitus of the Or Ein Sof. If you want to say that, all the spheres of b'chinas blima, the b'chinas blima hus, they bli any identifiable or any identity. Let's put it that way. The Or is all pshutim, like it says in Sefer Yetzirah, es spheres blima. So we have apparently very like some contradictory statements regarding the spheros, and particularly the sphere of Chokhmah. As he says, Harigam kamo shahen blima, in their status of blima, harim b'chinas es spheros al kopanim. He learns that from the Sefer Yetzirah, a very interesting thing. Since it says es spheros blima, you would think that if the spheros are blima, like what divides one from the other to make them 10? You would think it's all one sphere. If the spheros are not divided one from the other, then you could understand they're all b'chinas blima because it's all one sphere. But if we're going to say that the es spheros are blima, at the same time there's 10 spheros blima, what does that tell us? That tells us that there must be some kind of distinction in the oiros, even though each of the oiros is b'chinas blima. Nevertheless, there must be some distinction between the oiros. In other words, there's a hagbola in the oir itself. In which case, how could the oir be simply Gilu HaHelem? Okay, we have a problem. Houston, we have a problem. Okay, we're going to give one possible explanation shortly. We do find the concept of spheros in the oiros. In other words, there's some way that we have to be able to divide the spheros even in terms of the oir. we have to say that there's esespheros in the oiros, not just in the keilim. This is actually what he's angling for. He wants to explain in this hemshech anyway. The Rebbe Rashab is going to explain that there is a tziyur in the oir. I think I mentioned that right at the beginning. That's like one of the major themes of the first hemshech. Not the major theme of the first hemshech, that there is a tziyur in the or, even though the or is an or parshat, and even though the or is kain ama or and so on and so forth, nevertheless, there's a tziyur in the or, and he's going to explain this in depth, as we will see. But we didn't get there yet. We find that there are esespheres in the oires themselves. Like we say that there's esespheres of atik. Yeah, well, I'm sure you've heard the expression gvuros atik, chasodim of atik, and so on. Chesed of atik, gvur of atik. And there's other references to the spheros of atik as well. Those are the most common ones. Again, kamo esespheres the atik. Now, in atik, there aren't any keilim as yet. There's no inyan of keilim in atik. So how can you have esespheros in atik? It must mean that there's esespheros in the oil without the keilim. He's going to explain. Let's go back there. There's no keilim as yet in atik. And as it says in this passage, there's no other God with me, so to speak. As Hashem talking, the atik yoimin itmar. The Zohar explains that it says ein elokim imadi. That's talking about atik yoimin. Atik yoimin, the atik yoimin itmar. What's atik yoimin? Atik yoimin, atik bichlal is pnimis hakeser. There's three madrigas in keser. There's the chitzonis hakeser, which is arich. Then the pnimis hakeser is called atik, and the pnimis hakeser is called radla. Reisha de lois yada. Okay. Within atik itself, there's actually two general madrigas. There's the moichin of atik, or the chabad of atik, and then there's the midos of atik. The midos of atik are called atik yoimin. Yeah, yoimin. Why? Because there's 7 yoimin. In other words, the 6 spheros of Zohar and Malchus makes the 7 yoimin, the 7 days, so to speak, in atik yoimin. It's called the Ancient of Days, but in Zohar and in Kisvei Arizal, that's how they explain why it's called atik yoimin, because the yoimin are the various midos. So in any event, when it says "V'ein elokim imadi," there's no other elokim together with me, says HaKadosh Baruch Hu. The atik yoimin itmar, even on the madrega of atik yoimin, there's no inyan of elokim imadi. What does it mean, elokim imadi? The elokim hu b'chinas keilim. That's actually what it explains in Mefrosh HaZohar. That Elokim is always b'chinas hakeilim. That's the inyan of Elokim, is the inyan of keilim. Atik yoimin v'ein Elokim. When it comes to atik yoimin, even atik yoimin, never mind atik itself, but even atik yoimin, which is the 6 days, the 7 days rather of atik, ein Elokim imodi. There's no inyan of keilim over there. Even in the midos of atik. V'yesh loymar, demand atik lo yesh b'chinas hakeilim, ha'inish lo yesh sham inyan hakeilim klal. When we say that there's no keilim in atik, we don't only mean that there's no keilim there, but poil. In fact, there's no keilim. It means much more than that. It means that there's no inyan of keilim there. There's not even a possibility of keilim. It's not that simply that there's no metzius to the keilim, as I'll explain, that the keilim are bebechinas bittul. No, there's not even keilim to be bebechinas bittul in atik. And I'll explain. I'll give a beautiful motion for this in a minute. Again, it's not that there's not just that they're keilim there, but they don't have any yeshus, bittul mamash. No, it's not that there's no presence, there's no keilim bichlal in atik. Hagam shebemadrega shelamayla mi'atik the Atzilus. Even though when we're talking about madregas that transcend even atik of Atzilus. Again, atik's pnimis keser of Atzilus. So we sometimes speak about madregas that are higher than keser of Atzilus, excuse me. Como b'chinas Adam Kadmoin, como b'chinas Ak. Before Mama'ar is explained elsewhere when it's by Gam Ken Le'el Perek Yud, and we explained this before in the previous Perek. The heder keilim dasham, that the lack of keilim over there, hurak bechinas heder metzius. When we talk about the keilim in Ak, we talk about heder hametzius. In other words, there are keilim there, but the keilim that are bechinas bittul. So how does this work with Atik? We just said that in Atik there's no keilim. He's going to explain that when we're talking about Atik, when there's no keilim in Atik, there's no bechina of keilim, not even bechinas heder hametzius. We're talking about the bechina of Atik, which is higher. We're talking about Atik of Ak, right? Atik of Ak. We'll get to that shortly. So even in Ak, there's an aspect of keilim. In lower aspects of Ak, there is a bechina of keilim. But because of the tremendous amount of oil that floods Adam Kadmoin, therefore the keilim bechina is bittul. Again, gam bechinas Ak yesh metzius keilim. Rab shebnei toikev ha'oyer v'hagilui. Haim bechinas heder metzius. It's the keilim there, but the metzius is bottled completely. Okay. Nevertheless, when we're talking about Atik, there are no keilim at all. How could it be that on lower Madrega, just Pnimius Akesav Atzilus, there are no keilim, and whereas in Ak there are keilim? How does that work? That doesn't seem to make any sense at all. And therefore, he's going to explain that when we're talking about Atik over here, we're talking about Atik of Ak. So let's just go a little bit weiter. We'll see. Yeah, the Hare Ak Adam Kadmoin who bechinas arich the Klaus Ha'olemis. Adam Kadmoin, in a general sense, if you take the various partsufim, there's always 5 partsufim, right? The 5 partsufim and the 5 sfirot, the clusters of sfirot, 5 functions. Let's call the partsuf a particular. How would you call it? Functional description, I guess, something like that, right? A functional description. So you have Malchus or Nukva, which is the lowest partsuf. Then you have Zer Anpin, is the cluster of Sfirot from Chesed to Yesod, Chesed Gevurah Teres Netzachot Yesod. And then you have the Sfira of Bina, Ima, right? And then the Sfira of Abba, Chochma. Then you have the Sfira of Arich. Right? Now, each of these you have in each of the worlds. So in other words, you have Arich of Atzilus, and you have Abba of Atzilus, and Ima of Atzilus, and Zerampin of Atzilus, and Malchus Nukva of Atzilus. But you can also take it in a much more general sense, in the macro sense, right? In the macro sense. So that each world corresponds to one partsuf in general. So what would that be? The Olam HaAsiya would correspond to Nukva. Olam HaYetzira corresponds to Zeir Anpin. Olam HaBriya corresponds to Bina. Olam HaAtzilus corresponds to Chochma. And Adam Kadmoin corresponds to Keser. In other words, to Arich. Right? To Arich Anpin. The Hari'ag bechinas Arich in the Chlalus HaOlemes, as we just said. The Motzayim B'Shem HaMishnas Chasidim. Mishnas Chasidim is Rabbi Emanuel Chayriki, an Italian Mukubal. Mishnas Chasidim is a sort of a very abbreviated encyclopedia of all the Bechinos basically in Kabbalah, laid out according to the various Sadorim of the Mishnah. Right, so you have Masech Kiyum, you have Seder Zroim and Seder Moed and so on and so forth. That's the way he lays it out. It's quite an interesting sefer. But in any event, it's called Mishnas Chasidim. It's the Mishnah of Kabbalah, so to speak. But when it comes to Atik, not Arich, but Atik, which is the lowest part of the Ma'atzil himself. In other words, not the Ne'etzal. It's not the highest part of the Ne'etzal, which is Arich, but the lowest part of the Ma'atzil himself, HaKadosh Baruch Hu. As we will explain, the Shosh L'Mala B'chinas Ak. that the shorish of atik transcends at, because we're talking about atik bechlalus, not atik prati, right? Bepratus, atik bechlalus, which is the Or Ein Sof Livnei Atzim. It's Or Ein Sof Livnei Atzimtum. If Arich is Adam Kadmoin, then Atik is Or Ein Sof Livnei Atzimtum. Okay. In any event, Yesh Loima, the Sham Lo Yesh Inyan HaKeilim Klal, that there is no Inyan HaKeilim. V'im Kain, being that that's the case, as we just explained, that in Atik is no Keilim, Hari HaEsas Firis the Atik, Hein Bechinas HaOyer. Hein Bechinas HaOyer. So when we say that there's Esas Firis in Atik, what do we mean? We mean there's Esas Firis in the oil, because there are no Keilim over there. What else could there be? How could we say that the Esas Firis of Atik? We have to say that the Esas Firis in the oil itself. Yeah, that's right. There's a Tzil in the oil because it's not Atzmus. We'll get to that. Yes, for sure. That is correct. More came by Akudim. Akudim is one of the madregas of Adam Kadmoin. There's three primary madregas in Adam Kadmoin called Akudim, Nikudim, and Vrudim. Akudim is where all the oiros are gathered into one kli. Nikudim is where there's 10 nikudois, there's 10 oiros in 10 keilim. That's the shorsh of the world of Toihu. And then Vrudim is the world of Atzilus. These were the three types of spotted and striped and speckled or whatever it is that Yaakov made the sheep in his avodah when he peeled the sticks and so on and so forth, and he made the sheep drink from the sticks, from the troughs with peeled sticks in them. This is what he was doing. He was rearranging the oilemus and the oilem atzilus, v'chulu, as is explained in Eitz Chaim and various other places. In Chassidus as well. So that's the Indian of Akudim. Kmo kain ba'akudim is ba'etz Chaim. Shein esa oiros b'kli echad. We have esa oiros b'kli echad, so therefore it must mean that the oiros are divided into 10 subdivisions. How could that be without the keilim? We'll soon find out. Shein esa oiros b'kli echad chulu. Har sheyesh esa sfiras ba'oiros atzman. There's esa sfiras in the oiros as well. Even when they're in a single kli, there's still 10 oiros in one kli. If the oiros were mamash bli gevul, and there was no gevul in the oiros, and there was no subdivisions in the oir, so you get 10 different oiros. If it was b'chinas bli gevul mamash, lo efshar liyois klal hislabshus oiros b'keilim. There would not have been any possibility of the oiros being clothed, the oiros of the spheroids being clothed in the keilim of the spheroids. And this is exactly one of the most important chidushim of the Arizal over the Ramak. The Ramak maintained, as we've explained several times, that the oir in the spheroids is all the same oir in Atzilus. It's all the same oil, and it's only the kli that makes it look like chokhmah or bina or whatever. Just as if you would take water, which is all the same color, it's all the same water, and you put it in a green kli, it'll look green, and blue kli, it'll look blue, red, etc., etc., etc. Right? But the oil, you pour the oil and pour the water out, it's all the same water. So the Arizal argues with this. Arizal says that can't possibly be, because if the oil is within pshitus, if the oiros were mamash, like the Ramak says, they were between pshitus, and it's only the keilim that give them a tziyur, that give them a form, a shape, etc., a color, so to speak, then how would they ever get into the keilim? If the oil would be bli gevul, how could it ever get into a kli? It would shatter the kli completely. The keilim are not keilim for oil that's bli gevul. The keilim of b'chinas gevul, how are they going to take bli gevul? So it's going to explain. Sharei ze davar muskam. It's a thing that everybody agrees. Call goof b'chinas gevul. Any goof that's b'chinas gevul, i.e. the keilim. It's impossible to contain within it something that is unlimited. How could that possibly be? How could it possibly contain something that is unlimited in it? Because it is limited, and therefore, if it contains something unlimited, it will become unlimited in the same way as what it contains. But the keilim are b'chinas gevul. Sharayesh Metzias Spherois Ba'Atzilus. They exist. The spheres of Atzilus are there. Bebechinas Spherois, 10 Spherois. Shem Bechinas Metzias Chochma B'Chesed Chul. So Metzias Chochma, Metzias B'Chesed, Metzias Gevur, etc., etc., etc. All the various the Spherois of Atzilus, and they divided one from another. And therefore we're forced to say that at least in the keilim there is some division. Kama gufin tekinas lon, it says in the Tikkun Zohar, and there's a number of gufin that you set up for them. Gufin meaning the keilim that you set up for the Atzilus, for the spheroids. V'izkeriu b'tikuna da chesed droyamina, and they are called. This is the right arm is chesed and the left arm is gvura, and so on and so forth. The torso is tiferes. In other words, at least for sure the keilim have that bechinas of the bechina gvul. They're for sure an identifiable existence. This is the right arm, that's the left arm, kavioch, right? So bechinas mahus metzias spheres mamash. They have to. There is a reality to these spheres. Even though he says in brackets, even though shaina lokus mamash, even though they are mamash lokus, mikomakum harem bechinas metzias. Nevertheless, they're metzias. Not that they're elokim, they're elokus. V'umash elokus nas bechinas metzias. This is elokus becomes metzias, right? Just as, for example, the Sefer Torah is an inyan eloki. It's not elokim, but it's an inyan eloki. It's a godly thing. It's a holy thing. It's etc. So too, these spheroids are elokus, but they're not elokim. Okay, he's going to continue. We haven't come to the issue that he's going to, or the possible solution to the issue that we're talking about in a minute. As it says in Avodas HaKodesh, Rabbi Meir ibn Kabai, that the first gevul that comes out of him, out of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, hagvul haninsa memeno tchila, these are the spherois. And there, the explanation of the various commentaries, and it's accepted generally in Sifrei Kabbalah, that that's referring to the keilim, the gevul that comes out first. Okay, so we've established that the keilim of bechinas gevul. We're not arguing, and no one's arguing the keilim of bechinas gevul. So therefore, we're going to return to our question shortly. How is it possible for or that is bli gevul to be melubash in keilim the bechinas gevul? Muskam lukulam. Everyone agrees that keilim bechinas gevul. How does or that's bli gevul fit into keilim that's bechinas gevul? Okay, that's his question again. Ve'im ne'emar, if we're going to say sheha'or hu bechinas bli gevul, mamash, if the or is bechinas bli gevul, how could you have the or being melubash in the kli and or pnimi? Maybe bechinas or makif. Yeah, I understand, because it's not then limited by the kli. It's bechinas makif, that would be surrounding, enveloping, transcending the kli. But the fact that it's inside the kli, it's melumash in the kli, it's invested within the kli, it becomes the life force of the inner life force of the kli. It's the neshama of the kli, so to speak. How could this possibly, when the neshama within the kli, how could it possibly be that you can have an or which is or ein sof melubash in a kli, but bechinas pnimius? Okay. All right. So, what possible answer could there be to this question? Now, the rest of the chapter, except right at the end, the Rebbe Rashab is going to go off into a havamina. A havamina means to say, you could possibly say like this, but he's going to come to the conclusion that it's not like that. What's the havamina? Again, our problem is that we have keilim that are bechinas gevul, and we have or that's bechinas bli gevul. How do the two meet together in Olam Atzilus? How do they come together? So one possible solution, the first solution that he examines and will reject, the first solution is to say that, well, maybe the gevul of the keilim is not really gevul. Maybe it's only koyach gevul. It's the potential for gevul. It's the power to be magbil other things, but it itself is not bechinas gevul. Then that would answer the question. The problem is that is true, but it's not true in Olam Atzilus. That's true in Olam Atzilus. That's true in the Or Ein Sof before the Tzimtzum. That you have the inyan of koach gevul in the Or Ein Sof before the Tzimtzum. That's called the reshimo in the Or before the Tzimtzum, which afterwards becomes, after the Tzimtzum, is called the reshimo. It's the koach gevul before the Tzimtzum, it's called koach gevul. After the Tzimtzum, it's called the reshimo. Right, the roishem, the impression of the Or in the oisius of the reshimo. But this is the Havamina that we're going to be discussing now. Perhaps the keilim are not really b'chinas gevul, they're only b'chinas koach gevul. Okay, let's see how he explains it. Elsewhere in another Mama'ar, they come to the conclusion that gevul the keilim, that the limitations, the gevul, the finitude of the keilim, who shehem rak koach gevul, only the potential for gevul, not gevul mamash, but not actual gevul. It's the potential for gevul, for limitation, but not actual limitation. V'hu. And now he's going to go off and discuss this until more or less somewhere in here. So let's. I hope you can hold cop, and hopefully we'll get through it. Yeah, but even though the spheros are b'chinas chesed gevura, and therefore you would think that they are gevul b'poil, they're actual gevul, not just the potential for gevul. There is no limitation to their hispashtus, that they spread out forever. What does that mean here? We're trying to straddle two different worlds here. On the one hand, we're trying to say that the keilim are that the oiros or the spheros of Atzilus have the inyan of gevul, but not gevul mamash, only koach gevul. But how then do you call them chesed and gevura? Well, they are chesed and gevura, but the chesed of chesed is chesed ein sof, but it's chesed, not gevura. And that's what differentiates it or delimits it from gevura, because gevura is gevura ein sof, and it's not chesed. So what delineates them, so to speak, or delimits them, is their mahus, like their nature, what it is that they do. But in what it is that they do, they're infinite. So chesed is an infinite chesed, and gevura is an infinite gevura. That kind of semi seems to solve the problem, but not really, as we'll see. Okay. They do have some kind of geder. What's the geder? This is chesed, and that's gevura. And therefore, you seem to have solved the problem, but not really. And the fact that they're only koach gevul, the potential for gevul, who lishlol, is to deny the possibility, to negate the possibility. Atzilus eina magbilim. In Atzilus themselves, they are not magbil. In other words, the sphere of chesed is chesed bli gevul in Atzilus, as you'll say. Chesed al derech moshel hu b'chinas bli gevul in Atzilus, but it's not gevura. And gevura is bli gevul, but it's not chesed. And that's how they're limited. They're limited in what they are, but they're not limited in what they do. Nevertheless, it's a limitation that this is chesed, it's not gevura, it's not tiferes, it's not netzach, it's not hod. All right? Okay. And since they can cause or bring about that the or, when it is drawn outside of the world of Atzilus, outside of the world of Atzilus is a whole different ball game. In the world of Atzilus, they are unlimited, they bli gevul. But outside of Atzilus, they're b'chinas gevul, as we'll see. גם האחר שפועלים באור, כשיומשך חוץ לאצילוס, יהיה בחינת הגבולה, then the auras will be b'chinas Hagbola. There will be some limitation to each of the spheres. Were it not for the power of limitation, again, the koach hagvul, right? The koach hagvul is the koach hamagbil, the potential, the ability to limit itself outside of a certain sphere. So it limits itself outside of the sphere of chesed, limits itself outside of the sphere of chesed in that it's not gvura. It also limits itself outside of the sphere of Atzilus, that outside of Atzilus is not bli gvul. Only in Atzilus is a bli gvul, as I'll explain. Again, were it not for the power of Hagbola, of limitation in Atzilus, that would be bli gvul also outside of Atzilus. But because of the koach hagvul in Atzilus, therefore they're unlimited only in Atzilus, but not outside of Atzilus. Memela, automatically you have to say, Behechrech, shegam ba'Atzilus po'elim eze hagbola. In Atzilus there is some kind of limitation. And what is that limitation? That limitation he'll explain shortly. That limitation is as follows: Shagam she'ein sof dispashtusan. Even though they spread out infinitely, they extend infinitely. Where do they extend infinitely? Only in the world of Atzilus. That's what the Hagbola in Atzilus causes, that the Hispashtus outside of Atzilus will not be believable, only in Atzilus. Again, Mikom Makom Yeh Hispashtusan Rak Ba'Atzilus. The Hispashtus of Ein Sof in Chesed, for example, is only in Atzilus. Gvura only in Atzilus. Outside of Atzilus, no. We know the difference between the Or Ein Sof before Atzilus and the Or Ein Sof that is within Atzilus. He explained, the Or Ein Sof Shalom Atzilus, is drawn right down through right throughout the entire Seder Ishtalshelus. V'or Ein Sof shebe'Atzilus hu shemispashter rak ba'Atzilus, is only in Atzilus. It doesn't have permission to extend beyond the world of Atzilus. So to speak, it is it has its hunting ground, so to speak. It's a playground, and that's all of Atzilus, and no more than that. The order of Atzilus can only be in Atzilus, restricted to Atzilus. Rak ba'Atzilus, v'lo chutz la'Atzilus, v'lo chutz la'Atzilus. But in order for Atzilus to have an effect on beyond the lower worlds of Bria, Yetzirah, and Asiya, in other words, in order to extend into the lower worlds, that requires a special koyach. It's not Atzilus that spreads into the world of Bria, Yetzirah, and Asiya. It's a koyach which brings some of the aura of Atzilus into the world of Bria, as I'll explain. It's a koyach that's higher than Atzilus that allows it to be mispashted in Atzilus. Just like, for example, a teacher, when he wants to bring something to a child, he can explain it according to the keilim of the child, right? He can explain it according to the ability of the child to understand. Now, this is a great teacher, and he wants to inculcate and invest some of his knowledge in the child, but beyond the keilim of the child to accept. Can he do that? He can't do it through the child's intellect. He has to bypass the child's intellect. He has to bypass the keilim of Bria, Yetzirah, and Asiya, so to speak. And he has to plant it there somehow. How does he get to do that? Because he's a tzaddik, he's an Adam Godel. He has the ability to be able to do that. He has the ability to plant something in somebody that they're not, according to their development, ready to receive yet. The same thing happened over here with Oilemus Bria, Yetzirah, and Asiya. The Oyer of Atzilus, the Chochma of the Chochem, is able to be transmitted to the Talmud, not through the Seichel of the Talmud, but through the Seichel or the Ratzoin of the Chochem. And he gives an example of this. And just as it was at the time of the splitting of the sea, the splitting of the sea was, explained in Sifra Kabbalah, was the amalgamation of the world of Atzilus with the revealed world. That's why the world of Atzilus is represented by the water that covers the seabed, right? That It's behelem. We don't see the world of Atzilus. Suddenly, the world of Atzilus, the sea split. The world of Atzilus opened up, and it manifests itself. What was under the sea manifests itself, so to speak, in the lower worlds. So the Kriyas Yamsuf is Chabrus Atzilus in Biyah, and there it's written, Ksiv Vayoylech Hashem Esayam Beruach Kadim Azah. Hashem led the sea, split the sea using the Ruach Kadim Azah. What's Ruach Kadim Azah? It wasn't just a wind that was blowing. It's a wind that was blowing. It's a wind, in other words, a Ruach, not necessarily a physical wind, but a spiritual Ruach that split apart the sea. It split apart the Inyan of Helem, and it came from the level of Kadmona Shel Olam, a much higher Madrega than the world of Atzilus itself. Kadmona Shel Olam is a much higher Madrega. Keser, at least, if not higher than that. And similarly, the same thing happens with the Neshamas. Sometimes you get a Neshama of Atzilus comes into the world of Bia or Bria, Yetzirah, and Asiya. The world of, there are Neshamas da Atzilus that are wandering around amongst us. Who they are is very hard to identify. In some cases, it's very easy to identify. But generally, it's quite hard to identify. But in the case of very great tzaddikim, like, for example, the classic example is the Rashbi, the Arizal. These were Neshamas da Atzilus, and they were living in the world like that everybody else was living in as well. Baal Shem Tov. These were Neshamas da Atzilus. Now, someone asked me a question last night about something I once taught in, I think it was Yutes Kislev, about Neshamas Chadashos, these new souls. So as Arizal explains in Sharal Gigulim, Hagdoma Zayin, a little bit in Hagdoma Vav, but primarily in Hagdoma Zayin, he explains that there's two kinds of Neshamas Chadashos. There's a Neshama Chadasha that was not part of Adam HaRishon. Was not even part of Adam HaRishon, and that's a Neshama Chadasha mamash, or a Neshama Chadasha legamre. I think that's the lotion of that Arizal. It says the Neshama of the Alter Rebbe was one of those Neshamas. It wasn't even part of Adam HaRishon. Then when they come down to this world to be melubash in a body and so on, everything in Torah mitzvahs is extremely easy for them. Like they seem to acquire this vast knowledge in a very short amount of time. And Neshama Atzilus. And there are Neshamas that were part of Adam HaRishon that fled from here and therefore didn't taste the taste of Chet. So the Neshamas Chadashos, in that sense, even though they're not Chadashos like the Chadashos Legamre, because they were part of Adam HaRishon originally. Okay, in any event. Ukamosh Kasov, as Mama'ar has written elsewhere, Sheyesh Neshamas Shenikra Aleim Paragod. There are those Neshamas that the curtain is torn apart for them. It says that all the Rebbeim are all new Neshamas. It could be certainly, that certainly could be. It could also certainly be that all the Rebbeim are one Neshama. Neshama Alter Rebbe, essentially, in different manifestations. Anyway, whatever it is, let's not get into that now. That's the subject for bringing. Okay. That the curtain, in other words, the curtain separating Atzilus and Bria is ripped apart, and some Neshamas descend into this world. And this comes about through a Gilo or Elyon. So in other words, it doesn't happen by itself. It doesn't happen just because the curtain splits apart. The curtain only splits apart because of a higher Giloi that allows this to happen. So, where are we going with this? Let's see. The Oren Sof before Atzilus is Bechinas Ein Sof Mamash. It's not just Ein Sof in a relative sense. It's Ein Sof of Chesed or Ein Sof of Gvura, and Ein Sof of all the 10 Sfirot of Atzilus. No, it's Ein Sof Mamash in every aspect. And therefore, it's possible for there to be a Gilui of a revelation of the world of Atzilus in Biyah as Atzilus. As Atzilus in Biyah. Masha'enken or Atzilus, but Atzilus itself in normal circumstances when it's not specifically brought down into the worlds of Biyah, Bria Tzirasiyah, but it remains as the Or of Atzilus, then it can only be revealed in the world of Atzilus. Without that extra koyach to bring it down, it remains in the world of Atzilus. Or Atzilus, all the keilim, it's limited by the keilim of Atzilus, liotis pashtusoi, rak ba'atzilus. Then it spreads out and it maintains its Ein Sofiyut only in the world of Atzilus, but not below. Okay, so what are we trying to say with this? So he explains. If we're going to say that the light of Atzilus is mamash bli gevul, how's it going to be mulubish in the keilim? Shem bechinas koach hagvul. That the keilim of bechinas koach hagvul. How is it possible for bli gevul to be mulubish in gevul, even koach hagvul? Shehig belos hakli. That the koach hagvul is gevul mamash. So we're back to our original problem over here. How do you get bli gevul and gevul coming down together? It's not like before the tzimtzum. The beginning is koach hagvul shebe'ein sof, like it was in the koach hagvul of the shebe'ein sof. What again? The koach hagvul shebe'ein sof is what's called the yecholos laha'ir b'mida ugvul. Right, the koach laha'ir, the yecholos, the possibility, the ability to laha'ir b'mida ugvul, to illuminate in a finite manner. So that koach was a koach with Ein Sof before the tzimtzum. Just like there was a koach ha-bli gevul, laha'ir bebechinas bli gevul, so too is a koach ha-gevul, laha'ir bebechinas gevul, umida. But the way it was in the tzimtzum and before the tzimtzum, in the Or Ein Sof before the tzimtzum, as the koach ha-gevul, sheba Ein Sof, shein oitzes ha-reshima, that these are the letters of the reshima, as we said, and they had within them the Or Ein Sof bli gevul. In other words, there's no differentiation before the tzimtzum between the Or Ein Sof bli gevul and Or Ein Sof gevul. It's only a theoretical distinction according to what happened afterwards. That afterwards these two things seem to divide into two things. There's the koach and there's the gilu, koach gilu, which is the kaf. There's the koach helim, which is the reshima and the tzimtzum. So, but before that, there was the image is that the oisius contained the Or Ein Sof. The oisius were illuminated by the Or Ein Sof itself. That was the bli gevul before the tzimtzum. So when you say again, what's our problem over here? We wanted to say we have a problem with the inyan of Or Ein Sof. If the spheroids of Olam Atzilus the Or is Or Ein Sof ha-bli gevul, how are they going to be melushing gevul in the gevul of the keilim? So we attempted to answer that it's not mamash gevul, it's only koach gevul in Olam Atzilus. That's our attempted answer. So he says, he's explaining, you would be right if you're talking about in the Or Ein Sof before the tzimtzum, that then it was mamash koach bli gevul, and the Or Ein Sof was meir in the koach bli gevul before the tzimtzum. In other words, in the oises harishim before the tzimtzum. But bechinas gilu mamash, bechinas Ein Sof bli gevul. But that's before the tzimtzum, not after the tzimtzum. Atzilus is after the tzimtzum. But before the tzimtzum, there was no metzius at all. There was no metzius of oisius. Because the oisius are reshimo, even though we talk about them as if they're a metzius, they're not a metzius. As he goes on to explain. Lo haya inin metzius klal shehare oisius the reshimo and b'chiz metzius oisius chas v'sholem. They're not the metzius of oisius. It's a conceptual thing. We ex post facto we talk about it, but in and of itself, there was not a bechina of oisius per se. As we explained before in Perek Yud. Mavua b'makom acher b'oirich. We explained elsewhere at great length. Shezehu kamo oisius shebeluchos. That the oisius the reshimo before the tzimtzum were like the oisius in the luchos harishonos, not the luchos hashnios, the luchos harishonos. The first luchos that Moshe Rabbeinu, that were Ma'aseh HaKadosh Baruch Hu, those first luchos, how were the oisius on those luchos? In the second luchos, they were engraved into the luchos, but in the first luchos, they were all the way through, right? They were not just engraved into the stone, but they were all the way through. They went from one side to the other side. Interestingly enough, if you would read them from the back, they would read the same way, right to left, as you read them from the front. Obviously, B'nais Hayu Oimdi, right? That was a miraculous thing. But in any event, the oisius and the luchos were not a metzias. They were exactly the opposite of metzias. They weren't metzias. And that's how they made the oisius. They were not metzias. Why? Because there was nothing there. They were metzius. It was that blank area in a square fashion that made the letter mem, sofit. Or the arm of a vav and a yud that made an aleph was cut out of the stone completely, and therefore the or could shine through all the way. So by not being there, it was a kli. In other words, it was a kli b'bechinas bilti metzias. That depends if the tzimtzum touched them or not. We're talking about before the tzimtzum. The oised regime before the tzimtzum. Ve'im kain eno shaykh lish'ol al zeh, eich haya behem gilu ori ein sof. Therefore, it's not shaykh to talk about them. How was the gilu of ori ein sof in the oised regime before the tzimtzum? Ma'ach shakolu ori ein sof, because they were ori ein sof. There was nothing else. Ma'ach shakol ori ein sof mamash. Rak mashe koicha begvul. The oised before the tzimtzum were only a koicha gvul. The koicha gvul were ein sof mamash, k'mo koicha b'li gvul. And the koicha b'li gvul are weighed completely equally. There's no difference between them in the or ein sof before the tzimtzum. V'gam bazeh k'shaya gilu the or ein sof b'li gvul. And also in this matter, when there was a gilui of the or ein sof b'li gvul, haya koicha hagvul b'chinas helam b'tachlis. The koicha gvul was completely invisible. Right? Completely invisible, overwhelmed, so to speak, by the koicha b'li gvul, by the gilui, the koicha b'li gvul. The kashem shachar tzimtzum, kashem nizgal koicha gvul, like just like you have at the opposite end of the spectrum after the tzimtzum, when the koicha gvul was now revealed, when it's gaber al koicha b'li gvul, and it how do you say nisgaber alav? Was victorious over it? No, it superseded it, you could say, right? It superseded the koicha b'li gvul. Then now the koicha gvul was visible and the koicha b'li gvul was not visible. Hara b'li gvul hu behelem lagarmei. B'li gvul becomes completely invisible. There is a rishima before the tzimtzum. It's just not called the rishima. Overwhelmed is a good word, yeah. It's not called the rishima. It's called the oisis rishima before the tzimtzum. What will later on become the rishima, but in order to identify it, we call it the oisis rishima before the tzimtzum. Okay, shahari agam the or ein sof nimtza b'chol makom. Even though the or ein sof is found everywhere, mamash b'chol hachalal, right throughout the entire void, ad lamata mata, to the very lowest level, the leis asa panu minai, because there's no place that's devoided. And we're talking now about after the tzimtzum. Even after the tzimtzum, leis asar panu minai, there's no place that's devoid of him. There's no place that's devoid of the Eibishter, of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Only what? It's bechinas helem. Right? It's not murgash. We aren't aware of it. It doesn't come into consciousness at all. Mikom makom hare enu murgash klal. It's not, we're not aware of it. There's no revelation of or ein sof at all. Legabe that madrega, not legabe HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Legabe HaKadosh Baruch Hu, there's no place that's devoid of him. And every place is filled with him equally. Okay, but in the hergesh of the nivra, and especially the lowest of the low, they aren't even aware of Elokus, that there is such a thing. They're not aware of it. Okay, similarly, the opposite end of the spectrum. Before the Tzimtzum, when the Or Ein Sof was begilo, it filled the entire halal, and the koach hagvul was completely invisible. The bechol chelka halal haya begilui mamash, the bechinas Or Ein Sof, as I'll explain later on. This is all talking about before the Tzimtzum. But when we're talking about after the Tzimtzum, Hislapshus Pnimi, the Ora Ein Sof, how do we get the Hislapshus of Ora Ein Sof in the keilim? How do we get Ora Ein Sof clothed within limited keilim? Shehem bechinas gevul, that the keilim are bechinas gevul. Sheif'alu ha'agbola ba'ha'or ba'atzilus, and the keilim cause some kind of limitation of the or that's in Atzilus, v'chutz la'atzilus, and outside of Atzilus, the hagbola in Atzilus is that it's or of chesed and not or of gvura, and the or of gvura is or of gvura, not of chesed, and chutz la'atzilus is not mispashet outside of Atzilus, but eich efshar sheyekein. How could that possibly happen? How does that come about? So in other words, we still exasperated by the same question. We haven't answered our question yet. Our possible answer was that the keilim of Atzilus are not mamash gevul, they're only koach gevul. And he just explained that would be true if we're talking about the Or Ein Sof before the Tzimtzum, in the Rishim or before the Tzimtzum. But it can't be the case in the world of Atzilus. That cannot be the case in the world of Atzilus. Therefore, we're stuck. How do we have the inyan of Or habli gvul in keilim that are gvul, and not just koach gvul, but gvul, in Atzilus? We have to say, therefore, that there's a tziyur in the Or, that the Or itself has limitations in it. It's not Or Ein Sof mamash. Relatively speaking, it's Or Ein Sof, but in Olam Atzilus, it's already only relatively Or Ein Sof, not mamash Or Ein Sof. That's what he's going to say. Behechrech, we have to say, we have to conclude, Sha'oris Atzilus and Meknis Lapshus Pnimi Ba'Keilim, K'mosh Ba'al El, Perek Hayvav. We have to say that the Oris of Atzilus are clothed in an Oifen Pnimi in the Keilim, as explained in Perek 5 and 6. We know that there's hislapshus or of oiros in the various oilemes, and that comes from its root in the esespheres of Atzilus. So we have to say that this hislapshus or in Atzilus. How it can happen, we'll see. And truth is its own witness. Yeah, very important statement. Ha'emes eid la'atzmo. It's a statement of Chazal that truth is its own testimony. It's its own witness. Yeah. We see that this is in fact the case. That is that it's an or pnimi in the spheres. It's not just an or makif. How's it possible that in gvul we have the or bli gvul? He has the answer. We must say we must say that the or Atzilus is not b'chinas pshitus mamash and bli gvul mamash. There is some tziyur in the or, which we will be explaining in subsequent prokim. Okay, let's just do the kitzur. Onam gam ba'oris Atzilus hein b'chinas esespheres. There's esespheres in the world of Atzilus also. Kmo atik v'akudim shebesespheres hein ba'oris. She'esespheres hein ba'oris. And we discussed that in atik and in akudim there's esespheres even in the oiris themselves, not just in the keilim. She'im heim bli gvul. That if these oiris are bli gvul, eich mislabshin ba'keilim she'im b'chinas gvul. How can they be clothing keilim that are limited? And even if you want to argue that they're koach gevul and not gevul mamash, nevertheless, there are nevertheless magbil. There's chesed, there's gvura, etc. And not only that, but the magbil also outside of Atzilus. It prevents the oil, the gevul in Atzilus prevents the oil from going outside of Atzilus. And it's not like the Or Ein Sof in the Oasis before the Tzimtzum, of the Rishimu before the Tzimtzum. Because Oasis the Rishimu before the Tzimtzum were not the Bechinas Metzias at all, and therefore you could have the Inyan of Gvul and Bli Gvul completely together without any problem. Shari Oasis Lo Haya Metzius Klon. The Oasis of the Rishimu were before the Tzimtzum were not in a state of being per se. V'gam be'emes haya'az koach hagvul behelem. The koach hagvul was still there. Ke'erech helem or Ein Sof bli gvul archa tzimtzum. Just like the Or Ein Sof is there after the tzimtzum, so too the koach hagvul was there before the tzimtzum. The Or bli gvul ifnei tzimtzum is still gvul because outside of Atzilus. Yes, correct. That's one of the things that he wants to explain. That Or implies tziyun. Yes, yes. But that's a chidush in Chassidus. You don't really find that so expressed so clearly in other Sforim until Chassidus comes along. Okay, Rabbi Isai, Ugvirtai. That is Perek Ayin Beis, and Be'ezras Hashem, we will continue next week. Any other questions? Any questions? Yeah, please post. Yeah, I will post it. Yeah. Okay, I'm going to stop recording at this point. Doesn't look like there's any questions. Yep, welcome. Okay, I'll post it. Should be up in about, I don't know, half hour or something like that.